Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
We have quite the journey ahead today.
We really do. Today, we are looking at this incredibly bizarre, just totally fascinating historical and philosophical overlap.
Yeah.
Because we have 19th century German idealism sitting on one side of the table, and then on the other side, we have the magical system of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Which is quite the pairing.
Right. And then, just to make it even more complicated, we throw in some highly theoretical geometric concepts about the fourth dimension. Naturally. And somehow, and this is the crazy part, all of these seemingly completely disparate fields, they're all trying to solve the exact same problem.
Which is the architecture of self-awareness.
Exactly. How does human consciousness actually prove that it exists?
Right.
But for you listening, we are taking a much more advanced route today. Because usually, in a standard Psych 101 class, the basic example of self-awareness is a human meeting another human.
The standard social friction.
Yeah, you interact, you learn about yourself through that initial finite encounter. But we are pushing way past that today.
Way past it.
Today's mission is to explore what happens when consciousness encounters something that looks exactly like a perfect reflection of itself.
Or the total opposite.
Right. What happens when it encounters the sheer, unchangeable, absolute infinite?
It's a massive, massive question.
It is. And to tackle it, our stack of sources today is just wild. We've got Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's famously dense masterwork, The Phenomenology of Spirit.
A notoriously difficult read.
Oh, incredibly difficult. So we're also pulling from some fiercely detailed Reddit debates that actually unpack his ideas brilliantly.
They really do.
We're mixing in those mathematical concepts regarding the fourth dimension, and we're delving deep into the esoteric traditions of Kabbalah.
Specifically the Shem HaMephorash.
Yes, the hidden explicit names of God.
It really is a staggering stack of sources to look at all at once.
It feels a little overwhelming.
It does. I mean, when you first look at this, it feels like we're trying to read a textbook on German idealism, a non-Euclidean geometry manual, and like a medieval grimoire all at the same time.
Just a light afternoon reading.
Right. And philosophy, mathematics, and occultism, they seem entirely different in their methodologies, completely different tool sets.
Yeah.
But they're all ultimately trying to answer the exact same fundamental question, which is, how do we relate to that which is outside of us?
That's the core of it.
It is. Whether it's a philosopher trying to define the strict boundaries of the self, or a mathematician conceptualizing a spatial dimension that we physically just cannot see, or a mystic trying to categorize the divine so they aren't literally crushed by its magnitude. The core dilemma is the same across the board. How does the mind interact with another without losing its own identity?
Okay, let's unpack this, because that brings us to the very first trap we fall into. The trap of the perfect reflection.
Right, the mirror.
Exactly. What if self-consciousness interacts with something that mimics it flawlessly?
It's a great starting point.
And our source text on the fourth dimension gives us this really fantastic physical analogy for this psychological problem.
It does.
So when we look in a mirror, we see an image that mimics us perfectly, right? It moves when we move.
It wears what we wear.
Yeah. But the text makes a very clear, crucial distinction here. It is undeniably a mirror image.
Just an image.
You see yourself in the mirror, but you are keenly aware. You know for a fact that you are present out here in the real world.
You're the original.
Right. You are the original, and the mirror is just the echo.
And that distinction is crucial. It really highlights the missing element in the mirror image, which is autonomy.
Autonomy.
Yeah. The text points out that we can distinguish between a true being and a mirror image simply by looking at the source of movement.
The internal motor.
Exactly. Only a true being can produce change or movement out of itself. The mirror image has absolutely no internal motor.
Right, it's totally passive.
It is entirely dependent on the original subject. I mean, if you raise your right hand, the mirror image raises its left hand. It has no choice in the matter.
It's basically a hostage to your movements.
It is. It cannot surprise you. It can't suddenly disagree with you.
That would be a horror movie.
Right, exactly. So therefore, if consciousness only ever interacts with a perfect reflection of itself, it learns absolutely nothing new.
Because there's no friction.
None at all. It's never challenged. It never has to justify its own existence because the reflection just passively agrees with every single move it makes. You are essentially trapped in an echo chamber of your own physical geometry.
Which maps perfectly onto Hegel.
It really does.
Because in the phenomenology of spirit, Hegel talks about this primitive, totally isolated state of consciousness. He calls it the pure I equals I.
I am I.
Right, I am I. It's this state where the self only ever recognizes the self. And Hegel points out that this I equals I is a completely motionless tautology.
It's empty.
It's totally empty. It's a closed loop. Because think about it. If I am the only thing that exists, and I only ever interact with my own thoughts, my own desires, my own reflection, how do I even know I'm real?
You don't.
There's no pushback. Consciousness needs real otherness. It absolutely needs an actual independent object out there in the real world to push against, just to prove its own reality.
And if there is no independent other, the self is just floating in a void of its own making.
Yeah.
Which actually brings us to a really fascinating application of this idea found in our esoteric sources.
The Golden Dawn stuff.
Right. We have this text from Cyril O'Regan. He was a very prominent figure in the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn.
Super influential guy.
Extremely. And he's discussing a specific type of psychological and magical meditation in this source. O'Regan describes a practice where the individual meditates to see oneself primarily as a receiver of impressions.
Okay, so someone who just watches, who is acted upon.
Exactly. Someone who is criticized or acted upon by the outside world. But then, and this is the key part, the practitioner is instructed to conceptually stand outside of themselves.
Like astral projection or just mental exercise?
More a profound mental exercise.
Yeah.
You try to see how your mask appears to others. And he explicitly notes in the text that the word mask comes from the Latin persona.
The persona.
Yeah. You are projecting your consciousness outside of your body to look back at the persona you've constructed for the rest of the world.
So you're actively trying to become your own external observer.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, if I'm agonizing over writing a professional bio for a website, I'm trying to step outside of my own head to see how this character I'm presenting will be perceived by a total stranger.
You're trying to be the other to yourself.
Right. But does that actually work?
Yeah.
I mean, can you really act as your own other?
What's fascinating here is why this matters and why it's ultimately insufficient on its own. Because we desperately try to become our own reflection to understand ourselves. We analyze our actions. We critique our behavior. We try to step outside of our own bias.
Sure, self-reflection.
But because that reflection, that mask, is still generated by us, it lacks that independent motor we talked about with the fourth dimension analogy.
Ah, I see.
We can construct a mask, and we can even analyze that mask from a hypothetical outside perspective. But we need an external consciousness, a truly separate, autonomous being to actually validate that mask.
Because otherwise we're just grading our own homework.
Exactly. The mask only has meaning if someone else is looking at it and reacting to it in a way we couldn't possibly predict.
Which perfectly brings in the Dion Fortune source.
Yes.
Dion Fortune, another major esotericist from around that same era, talks about practitioners visualizing what she calls inner plane contacts.
Spiritual guides, essentially.
Right. These are basically mental or spiritual guides that practitioners would try to communicate with during rituals. And she mentions figures like Socrates or Thomas More.
Historical figures.
Yeah, but the text notes something really strange about this practice. It says practitioners would visualize these entities as they supposedly appeared in their past physical incarnations.
Which is an interesting choice.
It is. Why would they do that? If you're talking to a being of pure spirit, why not just envision them as, I don't know, formless infinite light?
Because true formlessness, true otherness, is terrifying to the human mind.
It's too much.
It is. The text notes, they did this specifically to provide a link to the physical plane and to suppress the otherness of the identity they hold now on the inner planes.
Suppress the otherness.
Yes. They wanted to make these infinite spiritual beings look and feel like familiar, historical humans to make communication easier. They're actively trying to suppress the otherness because encountering a completely alien consciousness is just psychologically overwhelming.
But wait, if we apply Hegel's logic to this magical practice, we see a massive danger here.
Oh, a huge danger.
Because by suppressing the otherness entirely, by forcing the other to look exactly like a historical figure you already understand and feel comfortable with, aren't you just trapping yourself right back in the mirror?
You absolutely are. You are talking to a historical mask that you have mentally constructed.
A Socrates puppet.
Exactly. You are encountering a true independent other. You are encountering your own historical expectations of what Socrates or Thomas More would say to you.
So you're right back in the I equals I loop.
You are. You've essentially just populated your entire mental universe with highly detailed reflections of your own intellect.
Wow.
To truly grow, self-consciousness cannot just dress up the universe in familiar, comfortable clothes. It has to confront something that has its own independent existence, something that might push back, disagree, or even threaten it.
Okay, so if the mirror isn't enough, and if dressing up the universe in a comfortable mask isn't enough, what happens when we finally step out of that mirror maze?
When we meet a real other.
Right. What happens when we meet a real, distinct, completely independent other?
That takes us to the classic detour of this entire philosophical journey.
The famous struggle for recognition.
Yes.
So Hegel says that we have this deep, underlying hunger for the real. He calls it desire.
Desire with a capital D.
Yeah. And the most basic form of this is consuming the natural world just to prove we're real. Like, I am hungry, I eat an apple, the apple disappears, and I feel full.
Right.
My consumption of the apple proves that I exist and that I have power over the physical world.
But there's a fatal flaw in relying on the natural world for validation like that.
Because the apple is gone.
Exactly. When you consume the object of your desire, when you eat that apple, you destroy it. The object is gone. It can no longer validate you because it literally no longer exists.
It's just a temporary fix.
Completely temporary. Your feeling of certainty, your proof of reality, vanishes the exact moment the desire is satisfied and the object is negated.
So you just get hungry again.
Right. You have to keep consuming over and over and over in this endless, empty cycle of destruction.
Which doesn't get you anywhere.
No. Hegel realizes that to get permanent validation, to truly prove that you are a self-conscious being and not just a biological machine running on pure instinct, you need recognition from something that you don't destroy.
You need another mind.
You need recognition from another self-consciousness.
And this is where the phenomenology of spirit delivers what is probably one of the most famous, most heavily debated, and honestly most dramatic scenarios in all of philosophy.
The master and slave dialectic.
The lord and bondsman, yes. And to break this down, our sources actually include some fantastic, highly detailed explanations from a Reddit philosophy forum.
Which is surprisingly helpful.
It really is. Users like Lacuna Head and Grandpappy Duplanty, they do this incredible job of stripping away Hegel's incredibly dense 19th century German academic jargon.
It can be impenetrable otherwise.
Seriously. But they lay out the raw, almost cinematic mechanics of this encounter perfectly.
So how does it start?
Okay, so imagine two independent self-consciousnesses meet for the very first time. Let's call them Subject A and Subject B. Up until this exact moment, Subject A has been the absolute center of their own universe. They are the measure of all things.
The only subject.
Right. But suddenly, out of nowhere, here is Subject B, who also thinks they are the center of the universe.
This is a profound existential crisis for both of them.
A total crisis.
Because if Subject B is the true center of the universe, then Subject A is just an object in Subject B's world.
Just another apple.
Exactly. Subject A is just another apple to be consumed or used, and neither consciousness can accept being reduced to a mere object. They both demand to be recognized as the absolute essential subject.
But they can't just talk it out.
No, they can't just sit down and agree to disagree. They have to prove to each other that they aren't just natural biological animals.
Because animals just run on survival instinct.
Right. Animals are tied to biological existence. To prove they are higher than nature, to prove they are pure, free self-consciousness, they have to show that they do not care about their own biological survival.
They have to risk it all.
They have to risk their lives.
Which leads to the life and death struggle. They absolutely must fight. And what's fascinating here is that they aren't fighting over food or territory or mates or anything biological.
No, it's purely abstract.
They are fighting purely for prestige, for recognition. They have to be willing to give up everything down to the very core of their physical being.
They must show that their physical body is completely contingent. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But their self-consciousness, their abstract freedom, that is absolute.
So they fight, and because they are evenly matched, the fight goes right to the brink of mutual destruction.
But there's a catch.
Right, the paradox. If they both die, no one gets recognized.
Yeah.
The whole point was to get a witness. So one of them has to break.
One of them has to flinch.
Yeah. One of them, facing the absolute terror of death, realizes they actually value their biological life more than their abstract freedom. And out of fear, they submit.
And in that moment of submission, The relationship is completely forged.
It's locked in.
The one who was willing to die, who conquered their fear of death, becomes the Lord, the Master.
Okay.
The one who submitted, who clung to their physical existence and completely surrendered their claim to absolute independence, becomes the bondsman, the slave.
Right.
The master gets exactly what they wanted. They are recognized by the other as the supreme independent consciousness. And the slave gives up their claim to independence and essentially agrees to be a thing.
An object.
An object that exists solely to serve the master and process the natural world on the master's behalf.
Wait, hold on. I'm stuck on the master winning here.
Okay, why?
Because if the master wins the fight and gets the slave to do all the actual work, how is that a hollow victory? I mean, from a biological standpoint, the master just secured limitless resources and physical safety.
They won the lottery.
Yeah. They get to sit on a throne while someone else harvests the wheat and builds the castles. Why does Hegel think the master is the loser in this dynamic?
Because you're looking at it from a purely biological standpoint.
Okay, fair.
Remember what they were fighting for in the very first place. They weren't fighting for wheat or castles.
They were fighting for recognition.
Exactly. The master wanted recognition from an equal, from another independent self-consciousness. But by winning the fight and completely subjugating the other person, the master has reduced them to a mere object.
Oh.
You cannot get meaningful recognition from a tool.
It's like if your smart speaker turns on your lights when you ask it to, you don't feel validated as a human being.
Exactly. The smart speaker isn't recognizing your humanity. The master is now getting their absolute validation from a source they fundamentally view as subhuman and inessential.
So the review is totally worthless.
The master's reality is entirely dependent on the recognition of a slave. And further, because the master no longer interacts with the resistance of the natural world.
Because the slave's doing all the heavy lifting.
Right, because the slave does all the actual work.
Mm.
The master becomes detached from reality. They become complacent, dependent, and ultimately completely stagnant.
They're trapped.
They are trapped in a dead end of their own making.
Okay, that makes total sense. They wanted peer review, but they forced the peer to become a mindless subordinate, so the validation means nothing. The winner actually loses their connection to reality.
Precisely.
But what about the slave? Because the slave lost the fight, they're terrified, they're subjugated, and they're forced to perform grueling labor. How could Hegel possibly argue they are better off?
This is where Hegel's genius really shines. And it hinges entirely on the nature of work and the transformative power of fear.
Fear?
Yes. The slave experienced the absolute existential fear of death during that struggle. Hegel says this fear shakes the slave to their very core. It melts down all the rigid natural assumptions about the world.
It breaks them open.
Everything they thought was stable was proven to be contingent in the face of annihilation. Their slate is wiped clean by terror.
Wow.
But then the slave is put to work. The slave is forced to take the raw materials of nature wood, stone, metal, and shape them according to the master's desires.
And this is the magic of labor.
It is.
Because by working on the physical world, the slave doesn't just destroy the object like the master does when eating an apple. The slave transforms the object.
They alter it.
They stamp their own rational will, their own design onto the physical universe. When the slave builds a chair or a house or a bridge, they aren't just surviving, they are taking a concept from their mind and making it real in the physical world.
Exactly.
They can step back, look at that object, and see their own mind, their own effort, reflected back at them in a permanent, stable form.
Precisely. Through labor, the slave creates a reflection of their own mind in reality. They realize that they actually have the power to alter the universe.
Unlike the master.
Right. While the master is stuck just consuming and demanding empty praise from a tool, the slave is actually self-actualizing.
They're growing.
The slave realizes that their independence wasn't lost in the fight, it was just transferred into the things they create.
That is incredible.
The slave discovers true freedom. Not the abstract, violent freedom of the life and death struggle, but the concrete, productive freedom of shaping the world. The slave, ironically, becomes the true engine of human progress and self-awareness.
It's a complete inversion of the hierarchy. The winner loses and the loser wins.
It really is.
Now, I want to make sure we are presenting our sources fairly here for you listening, because there is a major interpretive split in how this lord and bondsman dynamic is actually understood in academia.
There's quite a debate.
Yeah. Our sources note that this passage has been read in very different ways by different philosophical camps. On one hand, you have the Marxist reading.
Which is very popular.
Very. It's prominently advanced by thinkers like Alexander Kojève, which is referenced in our source text discussing Simone de Beauvoir's Hegelianism.
Right.
The Kojève interpretation reads the master-slave dialectic as a literal, historical, and sociological blueprint. They see it as the fundamental class struggle that drives all of human history.
The literal masters and slaves.
Exactly. The masters are the ruling class, the aristocracy, the owners of capital, and the slaves are the working class.
The laborers.
Right. And according to this reading, it is the labor of the working class that will ultimately transform the material world, leading them to self-awareness and giving them the power to overthrow the stagnant, dependent masters.
It's a very compelling historical lens.
It is.
But on the other hand, you have philosophers like John McDowell, who was brought up in that same Reddit discussion source.
Here's his take.
McDowell and others argue for a much more internal individual reading. They argue that Hegel wasn't necessarily writing a political manifesto about social classes.
Right.
Instead, they view the lord and bondsman as an allegory for an internal process happening within a single individual's mind.
So it's like two halves of the same brain fighting it out.
Exactly. It is the mind coming to terms with its own dual nature.
How so?
On one side, you have what philosophers call the apperceptive consciousness. Yes. This is the pure abstract I that wants to be completely free of all physical limits. It doesn't want to be tied down by hunger or gravity or mortality. It wants pure freedom.
That's the master.
That's the master. And on the other side, you have the empirical consciousness. This is the physical, biological self that actually lives in the real world.
The body.
It has to eat. It has to sleep. It has to do the actual messy work of living. That's the slave.
Okay, so the master part of my brain says, I am a pure intellect capable of pondering the cosmos. And the slave part of my brain says, yes, but you still have to do the laundry and pay the electric bill.
That's the exact dynamic. And McDowell's point is that true self-awareness only happens when the pure intellect realizes it absolutely cannot exist without the biological self doing the work.
They need each other.
The apperceptive consciousness has to recognize the value of the empirical consciousness. The mind has to integrate its lofty ideals with its physical labor.
And just to be clear to you, the listener, we are not taking sides here between Kojève's Marxist reading and McDowell's psychological reading.
We don't have to.
No. The beauty of the phenomenology of spirit is that it is robust enough to support both a macro-sociological interpretation and a micro-psychological one.
They both work.
They do. Both views are incredibly useful lenses for understanding the text, and neither invalidates the other. The core takeaway, regardless of which lens you use, is that domination fails to produce true self-awareness.
Domination is a dead end.
And that transformative work is the actual path to realizing our own freedom.
So Hegel hits this wall. He proves that dominating a finite other doesn't work. It leads to stagnation.
Right.
But what's amazing is that hundreds of years before Hegel even wrote this down, medieval mystics and religious thinkers were actually trying to solve this exact same architectural problem of consciousness.
They were already on it.
They were. Because if placing your faith in a finite physical master or a finite physical slave is a dead end, where does consciousness go next?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it swings to the absolute opposite extreme.
It usually does.
It decides that if the physical world is just a cycle of domination and empty consumption, then the true essential reality must be something completely beyond the physical world.
Something perfect.
It must be something unchangeable, perfect, and infinite. And this takes us to section 3 of our deep dive, the encounter with the infinite.
A massive shift in scale.
Huge. And Hegel calls the stage that wrestles with this the unhappy consciousness.
The unhappy consciousness. It is a profoundly tragic stage in Hegel's system.
It really sounds depressing.
It is. He often frames this in the context of Judeo-Christian dualism or medieval asceticism. This is the stage where the individual feels utterly, completely separate from God, or the infinite or the unchangeable.
How disconnected.
Right. The finite self looks at its own physical existence, its hunger, its bodily functions, its mortal flaws, its inevitable death, and feels like a complete nullity.
Like it's worthless.
It feels dirty, broken, and worthless.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the infinite is viewed as this perfect, pure, unreachable reality way up in the heavens.
And the tragedy here is that it is a divided self.
Right.
It contains both the awareness of its own messy, changeable nature and the concept of an unchangeable perfection. But it cannot bridge the gap between them.
The gap feels infinite.
It places all value, all reality in the beyond, which means it completely devalues its own actual life. It constantly strives to reach the infinite through devotion, through ritual, through denying the body. But because the infinite has been defined as strictly otherworldly, the finite consciousness can never actually arrive there.
Never.
It is a state of perpetual yearning and perpetual failure.
And this leads to a specific, fascinating variation of this despair that Hegel calls the beautiful soul.
I find this concept so striking and honestly so incredibly relevant even today.
Oh, absolutely.
The beautiful soul is a consciousness that is so obsessed with the purity of its own infinite ideals that it absolutely refuses to act in the real world.
It won't get its hands dirty.
Exactly. It looks at the finite world and says, everything down there is messy. Politics is corrupt, society is compromised, human relationships are inherently flawed.
So it does nothing.
So, to avoid staining its pure, beautiful inner ideals with the dirt of reality, it does nothing. It refuses to communicate, it refuses to compromise, it refuses to participate in the mechanics of the world.
It is the ultimate form of spiritual and intellectual narcissism.
Narcissism, yeah.
The beautiful soul thinks it is preserving its perfection. But Hegel points out that by refusing to act, by refusing to enter into the messy, contradictory reality of existence, the beautiful soul becomes completely hollow.
Because there's no substance.
Right. It is just an empty yearning. It has no actual substance because substance requires interaction, requires friction and existence in the real world. A soul that never acts is practically a dead soul.
It's just a ghost.
It is terrified of making a mistake, so it makes nothing at all.
We see this all the time today. People who refuse to vote or participate in any civic action because they claim all available options are flawed.
Right.
They prefer the purity of their own theoretical ideals over the messy, incremental reality of actually trying to improve things. They just sit on the sidelines and judge.
Exactly. Though it's important we keep this strictly philosophical.
Yeah.
And recognize that this is a structural trap of consciousness, not just a modern political critique.
Of course.
The beautiful soul is trapped because of a fundamental logical error regarding the nature of the infinite.
A logical error.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the expert takeaway here is that a purely separate infinite is just as useless and logically flawed as the perfect mirror reflection we started with.
Wait, how can the infinite be logically flawed? By definition, it's supposed to be limitless.
That is exactly the point.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you define the infinite as everything that is not the finite world, if the infinite is totally beyond the physical realm, totally separate from us, then the infinite is actually limited.
Oh, I see. Because it has a border.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's bounded by the finite. It stops exactly where the physical world begins.
Right.
But by definition, the infinite cannot have a boundary. A true infinite cannot exclude the finite. It must include it.
Mind blown.
If God, or the absolute, is kept strictly separated from human existence, then it isn't truly infinite. It's just another finite thing sitting next to our finite world.
Wow.
The unhappy consciousness suffers because it fundamentally misunderstands the very nature of the infinite it is worshiping. It thinks the infinite is over there, when logically, the infinite must include right here.
Okay, that is a brilliant piece of logic. An infinite that excludes the finite is limited by the finite, therefore it's not infinite.
Exactly.
But that leaves human consciousness in a terrifying position.
A very vulnerable one.
Because if the infinite truly includes everything, including us, how do we interact with it without being completely obliterated by its sheer scale?
That's the million-dollar question.
If we can't hide in the mirror, and we can't subjugate it like the slave, and we can't separate it like the unhappy consciousness, what do we actually do?
This brings us to Section 4. Naming the infinite, the occult and Kabbalistic attempts.
Right.
This is where we look at the historical, mystical ways humans have tried to solve this exact Hegelian problem using entirely different tools. How do you interact with the infinite without being crushed by it?
And our sources point us directly toward the Shem HaMephorash.
Yes.
The Shem HaMephorash. In Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, this refers to the explicit hidden name of God. But it's not just a single word that you can pronounce.
No, it's far more complex.
The most famous version is the 72-fold name. And the way it is derived is a perfect example of human consciousness trying to mathematically structure the infinite.
It's brilliant geometry.
It is. It's pulled directly from the book of Exodus, specifically chapter 14, verses 19, 20, and 21. These are the verses that describe the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea.
A moment of literal divine intervention.
Exactly. And in the original Hebrew, each of these 3 verses contains exactly 72 letters.
And the Kabbalists didn't just read them straight through. They arranged these 3 verses using a really fascinating method called boustrophedon.
I love that word. It literally translates to like an ox plowing a field, right?
Exactly. Imagine a farmer plowing a field. They go down one row, they turn around, and they come back the opposite way.
Right.
The Kabbalists applied this to the text. You read the first verse from right to left, which is the normal way Hebrew is read.
Okay.
But then you take the second verse and line it up underneath the first one, reading it from left to right, backwards.
Like the ox turning around?
Exactly. Yeah. Then the third verse goes underneath that, reading right to left again. When you stack them this way, you end up with 72 columns, and each column contains exactly 3 letters.
And those become the names.
Yes. These 72 3-letter combinations become the 72 names of God.
What is happening here is an act of supreme categorization.
It is.
The divine, the absolute infinite, is just too vast, too blinding to be comprehended all at once. So the mystics mathematically sliced the narrative of a miracle, the parting of the sea, into 72 distinct fragments.
They chopped it up.
They took the infinite and broke it down into manageable, structured pieces. And the 72-fold name isn't even the only attempt mentioned in our sources.
There are others.
Yeah, there are other variations used throughout history. There is a 12-letter name. There is a 42-letter name, which is derived from the initials of the medieval prayer Anna B. Coach.
Right.
There is even a mysterious 22-letter name found on protective amulets in the Cairo Geniza, which was an ancient storeroom of Jewish manuscripts.
But even breaking the infinite down into 72 3-letter names wasn't enough for some esoteric traditions.
Because they're hard to say.
Because those 3-letter roots are often completely unpronounceable. They're just abstract consonants.
Right.
This is where Johannes Reuchlin comes into the picture. Reuchlin was a major figure in the development of Christian Kabbalah during the Renaissance. He wrote a highly influential book called De Arte Kabbalistica. Reuchlin looked at these 72 infinite abstract fragments and decided they needed to be made approachable for human consciousness.
So what did he do?
He added standard divine suffixes to them, specifically El or Yah, both of which mean God.
What's fascinating here is by adding El or Yah to a root like VHU, you get Vahoya.
Right.
By adding it to ILI, you get Ailiel. Suddenly, you don't just have an abstract mathematical fragment of infinite power, you have a name.
You're a personification.
You have an individual angel. Reuchlin argued that by doing this, the incomprehensible infinite is individuated into 72 approachable, distinct entities.
You give it a face.
You can't have a conversation with the pure, blinding light of the absolute, but you can pray to Vahoya for courage, or ask Ailiel for clarity.
It is a profound psychological shift. If we analyze this from a structural perspective, the real question is, why go through this incredibly elaborate mathematical process?
Why do all this work?
Why invent this massive metaphysical bureaucracy of 72 angels? Because as we established with Hegel, the human mind absolutely cannot interact with a pure, blank infinite.
It would just fry our circuits.
Exactly. Hegel mockingly referred to a totally undifferentiated absolute as the night in which all cows are black.
That's a great line.
It means in the pitch dark, everything is exactly the same. There was no distinction, there's no chase, no meaning. To engage with the infinite, human consciousness has to chalk it up into shapes, names, categories, and hierarchies. We have to map it.
The Shem HaMephorash is essentially humanity building a conceptual user interface for the infinite.
A user interface, I like that.
Yeah. Think about a computer. At its core, a computer is just billions of microscopic switches flipping between 1 and 0 at the speed of light.
Raw binary.
It's raw, incomprehensible code. A human brain cannot read a river of binary code and understand it. It would just look like static. So we build an operating system. We build a user interface. We take that raw code and turn it into little pictures of folders and a trash can and an arrow cursor.
That makes perfect sense.
By adding L or Yah to those unpronounceable 3-letter roots, Reuchlin was basically adding an executable file extension, a .exe, to the raw code of God.
Wow.
He was creating icons that the human mind could actually click on to run the program.
That is a phenomenal analogy. You are translating the infinite into a format the finite mind can actually process without burning out.
Exactly.
And the system didn't just stay in quiet meditation either. It was weaponized, in a sense, by later occultists.
How so?
People like Thomas Rudd, Blaise de Vigenère, and later Samuel Littledale MacGregor Mathers of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
They took these 72 angelic names and paired them up against the 72 evil spirits detailed in the Ars Goetia.
Which is the section of that infamous grimoire, The Lesser Key of Solomon.
Right. They created a one-to-one balancing system. For every demon representing chaos and finite destruction, there was an angel of the Shem HaMephorash to bind it and keep it in check.
A perfect balance.
They built an entire architecture of consciousness using the chopped-up pieces of the infinite.
And there is one more historical metaphor in our sources that perfectly captures this intersection of finite human effort and infinite power.
The golem.
The folklore of the golem. Famously referenced by writers like Jorge Luis Borges. The golem is a creature made of dead clay, shaped by human hands.
Right.
But it is animated, it is brought to life, by placing a piece of parchment bearing the explicit name of God, the Shem HaMephorash, into its mouth or onto its forehead.
The golem is the ultimate synthesis of all the themes we've been discussing today.
Yeah.
And it beautifully brings back the fourth-dimensional mirror concept we started with.
Oh, how so?
Think back to the slave in Hegel's Dialectic. The slave works the dead earth, shaping it with their hands, pouring their rational will into the mud to create a reflection of themselves.
Right, their labor transforms the world.
But the golem myth takes it one step further. The human being acts as the creator, shaping the finite clay, essentially creating a three-dimensional mirror of the human form. But a statue is just a mere image. It has no internal motor.
Just like the reflection in the mirror, it can't move on its own.
Exactly. So how do you give the mirror image autonomy? You use the mechanism of the infinite.
The name of God.
By placing the Shem HaMephorash into the golem, the human mind is using the higher dimensional architecture of the divine to animate the physical world.
That's incredible.
It shows that the finite and the infinite are not separate. They must be combined to create life. The golem is a three-dimensional mirror reflecting human consciousness, animated by a higher dimensional geometry.
Which is the perfect bridge to Section 5, the grand synthesis.
Bringing it all together.
We have looked at the empty trap of the mirror, where the I equals I loop teaches us nothing.
A total dead end.
We've looked at the violence of the master and slave, where we learned that domination is a dead end and labor is the true path to freedom. We've looked at the despair of the unhappy consciousness, paralyzed by a false, separated infinite. And we have looked at the mystical attempts to chop up the infinite into angels and letters just to build a user interface we can comprehend.
A lot of ground covered.
So much ground. But how does Hegel actually solve this massive, tangled mess? How does he philosophically reconcile the finite human mind with the infinite universe?
To answer this, we look at our source analyzing Hegel's chapter on force and understanding, specifically referencing the work of philosopher Anton Friedrich Koch from Yale.
Okay.
This source explains a concept that sounds like a Zen riddle, the identity of identity and difference.
The identity of identity and difference. That sounds like a paradox designed entirely to give philosophy students a headache.
It really does, but it is the absolute skeleton key to Hegel's entire system.
Okay, lay it on me.
Earlier, we established that an infinite that strictly excludes the finite is a fake infinite. It's limited by its own boundary.
Right, the bordered infinite.
Hegel's solution is that the true infinite is not something far away in the heavens. The true infinite is the finite world sublating itself.
Sublating. That's the English translation of the famous German word Aufhebung, right?
Yes, Aufhebung. It is arguably the most important word in all of Hegelian philosophy. And it's famously difficult to translate because in German, it simultaneously means three totally contradictory things.
Which are?
To cancel, to preserve, and to elevate.
How can you cancel something and preserve it at the exact same time?
The best way to understand it is through a physical analogy. Think of a seed planted in the ground.
Okay.
For the seed to fulfill its purpose, it must break open and grow into a sprout. In doing so, the seed is canceled. It no longer exists as a round, hard seed.
The seed is gone.
However, the essence of the seed, its DNA, the physical matter that made it up, is preserved within the sprout.
It's still there, just changed.
And finally, the organism has been elevated to a higher, much more complex state of being. The seed sublated itself into a plant. The finite thing cancels its current limitations, preserves its essential core, and elevates itself to a higher state.
Okay, that makes it so much clearer. So how does sublation apply to the infinite?
The source text describes the relationship between the finite and the infinite as a dynamic oscillation, or a temporal instability.
A temporal instability.
It says the infinite comes to be finite and the finite comes to be infinite. They're not two different places on a map. They're a single pulsing process.
A process.
The infinite limits itself to become the finite physical world, just like the pure code limits itself to become a clickable icon. And the finite physical world strives, learns, labors, and develops to realize its own infinite nature.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where Hegel introduces his ultimate concept, Geist.
Yes, Geist.
Which translates to spirit or mind. But we need to be very careful with that word, because Geist is not a ghost, and it's certainly not a guy with a white beard sitting on a cloud in the sky.
It's not at all. Geist is the collective developing consciousness of reality itself. Hegel famously defines it as the I that is we and the we that is I.
I love that quote.
It is the massive interconnected network of all self-consciousnesses, all human institutions, all cultures, all art, and all religions interacting and developing over time.
It's the ultimate aha moment of the phenomenology. Geist is the world teleologically coming to know itself.
Teleologically meaning it has a direction.
Right, a direction, a purpose, an end goal. Our sources note that Hegel views history as an invisible hand process.
Like economics.
Yeah. When you look back at the rise and fall of empires, the bloody wars, the shifts in art, the scientific revolutions, it looks chaotic, messy, and often deeply tragic to us in the moment.
It just looks like noise.
But on a macro scale, through the lens of Aufhebung, it is the spirit of the world learning from its mistakes. It's subduing its contradictions, canceling its outdated forms, preserving its hard-won knowledge, and elevating itself toward absolute knowledge. This completely reframes the entire journey of consciousness we've been discussing today.
It really does.
When we look out at the universe, we aren't looking at an alien other that wants to crush us. And we aren't looking at a dead, sterile mirror that just passively reflects our face.
No.
We're looking at a massive, evolving, living organism of which we are a vital, self-correcting part.
That's beautiful.
Every time a human being learns something new, every time a society improves its laws to be more just, every time a scientist overcomes a limitation, that is the universe waking up.
Waking up to itself.
That is the universe becoming more self-aware. Our consciousness is the universe's consciousness.
That is profound. It means our personal struggle to understand ourselves, the friction we feel with other people, the frustration of trying to learn a new skill, the desire to build something. It isn't just a personal therapy session.
No.
It is the fundamental mechanism of reality doing its work.
Exactly. It is a radically empowering way to view human existence. You are not a stranger in a cold, hostile universe. You are the universe's own capacity to think, to build, and to reflect.
You're the universe's brain.
The friction you experience with others, the struggle to understand complex ideas like the ones in these sources, the desire to create art or write code or build a family, all of that is the engine of Geist driving reality forward.
So what does this all mean? Let's recap the massive journey we've taken today.
It's been a long one.
We started in the sterile trap of the mirror, realizing that if we only ever look at perfect reflections of ourselves, if we stay in the I equals I loop, we never grow.
We're trapped in a fourth-dimensional echo chamber.
We then move to the violent, desperate struggle with a real other, the master and the slave.
The fight for recognition.
Where we learn that dominating someone else is a hollow victory, and that true freedom comes from labor. From taking the raw material of the world and stamping our rational mind onto it.
And then the scale shifted again.
Right. We then felt the crushing weight of the infinite. The unhappy consciousness, terrified of its own physical flaws, paralyzed on the sidelines like the beautiful soul.
The false, separated infinite.
And finally, we saw how human beings fought back against that crushing weight. We took the raw, unreadable code of the infinite, we chopped it up using boostrafidon into 72 names, we added executable file extensions like L and Ya.
Give it to the UI.
Yes. We gave it shapes and rules, and we used it to animate the clay of our own reality, like the golem.
And we brought it all together.
Through Hegel's grand synthesis of Aufhebung, we realize that the finite and the infinite aren't enemies. By giving the infinite a name and by shaping the world through our actions, we realize that we are the universe waking up to itself. We are the infinite experiencing exactly what it means to be finite.
It all comes back to that architecture of consciousness. We build the structures, philosophical, mathematical, and magical, that allow us to safely house the infinite inside the finite human mind.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to turn over in your mind long after this deep dive is over.
What's that?
We talked about the Kabbalists and the occultists meticulously breaking down those Red Sea verses, obsessively arranging the letters of the 72-fold name of God into columns and angelic sigils.
A lot of detailed work.
When these ancient mystics were doing this, performing these elaborate rituals in the dark, were they really trying to summon an alien entity from the beyond?
Oh.
Or by mathematically structuring the infinite, were they actually building the ultimate multidimensional mirror?
A new kind of reflection.
A mirror finally complex enough and deep enough to reflect the true, terrifying, and beautiful face of human consciousness back at itself.
Now that is a thought to leave on.
Keep digging, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.